Hi, hello, welcome. It's been a while since I had a video where I talked about what's going on. This is my channel and kind of an update on my life and personal situation. It's been a long 2020 and 2021. I haven't really made much content because I've been going through a lot. I do have to say, very lucky. I have a nice job, continue to make money, and I've continued to be employed, have benefits, and thankfully never contracted COVID. However, that doesn't mean my mental health has been the greatest. So, I want to talk a little bit about that. Some of you who watch my channel probably don't know much about me because I don't talk that much about myself. Uh, I am just somebody who started out life on a pretty rough spot. And I wanted to create a short little video. I'm going to touch on some key things that helped me figure out myself, and I'm still figuring myself out. Over mistakes I've made, mistakes I'm not proud of, some success, some things about me. I just feel like I should be honest about. So, with that said, the content on my channel usually has been about tech related items or of that nature, so this is a little bit different. So if you're here for that type of content, I do plan on making it again soon. But this video is not going to be directly about that. The video is going to be more about me and just who I am and what I'm about. Kind of how I came to be and where I am now. About some of the things I've been suffering with as well lately. So, with that said, I'm going to cover a couple things. I'm going to cover a brief summary of my past, my childhood, my young adulthood, homelessness, and where I am today. And that is essentially what this video will be broken into those parts. So, with that said, I will go ahead and leave chapter markers below to these sections. This will be my first time trying to actually edit and put together a video of multiple parts. So, please forgive me if I'm not that great. I'm going to do my best. But I felt like this is something I wanted to create because I don't know, I haven't found much content out there like this, and maybe I can help someone else feel a little bit better or come to terms of being who they are as well. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump into it. So, let's get started with my childhood. My childhood was not a wonderful thing. My parents divorced when I was just 2 years old. And I don't remember much during this time, but I do know that there were times where my parent, well, mainly my mother, pitted me against my father. Going back and looking at how things were and what things occurred and all that other stuff from my past, I know for a fact now that my mother was in the wrong. And she mainly just used people. And she had custody of me most of my life because, well, sadly, she tells good sob stories. And people believed her. That's not to say that she wasn't sometimes a good mother, but it wasn't the best. She eventually did some things that ended up getting her arrested and ended up getting me back in the custody of my father. And from there was when I was in middle school. So from age that I really couldn't remember much all the way to middle school. Well, elementary actually. I was in fourth grade when it occurred. Fourth, fifth grade. And that's when that occurred. Man, I don't really remember much of my past because so much has happened more than even just the previous year. There was a lot. My mother tried to get me to make claims that were not true about my father giving her money, child support stuff, when there was nothing he could do. It was automatically pulled out. He was paying what he was supposed to. In the end, I actually found out later on that he continued to pay. It was just continued to be garnished after he gained custody of me. He's asked the state for that money back for years now and has never gotten it. And he told me if he ever did get it back, he said it's mine. He paid it for me. He'd give it to me, but I'm not worried about that now. That's in the past. My childhood was bouncing mainly with my mother, who often got us in very bad situations and often did things that are not okay. Things like she encouraged me to steal. And I did it once. I stole a small candy bar and ended up getting her mad at me because I went back and I returned it and I was sorry because I couldn't do it. She did other things as well, and I was young and impressionable, and I just saw her do lots of not okay things. My father, when I was with him, he tried his best to hide his work and other things and tried to make sure I had a good time. He didn't have a lot of money, but I remember we'd always make mini corn dogs because I enjoyed those. He'd make those for me. I'd sometimes get into his peanut butter jar and eat the peanut butter, and he'd get mad at me. But he was always caring, and when I got in trouble, he punished me appropriately. He'd put me in timeout. He would take things away, but he was always good and caring, and I love him still to this day. He's not fully, he knows about me, and he supports me because I'm his blood, and he knows me, but he doesn't fully agree with everything. What he says, you know, his words are, "You're my son." No, I am non-binary and stuff. He knows that I've been with multiple guys now, and that part he doesn't fully agree with. I don't think I can tell him. I could probably tell him no, I'm non-binary, but he probably wouldn't get it, and he'd probably just be more like, whatever. I don't think it's worth it. Certain people in your life, you're like, is it really worth telling them? I mean, you can, but it's whatever. But he's still there. The reason you're going to hear in this next chapter, the reason things didn't go as well is because when he gained custody of me, a couple of years later, things started to go worse for him. The company he worked for ended up laying off everybody. He struggled to find different jobs, and I ended up living with my grandparents. My grandmother was the greatest saint ever. It's so wonderful. I loved her so much. She did everything she could. My grandfather cares, but in his own way, and pushes his family back a lot because he's never been somebody who was good to everybody all the time. He's a very much strict, I want things done my way or the highway. Very upset when things don't go his way. But to everyone outside the world looks at him and they're like, oh, he's this wonderful, great saint. But the real family knows the truth. And I feel like there's a lot of families that are like that. And I'm not saying he's bad, but he is the reason I ended up having to run away. I ended up having to live with them. My father ended up living out of his car for a while. He just kept getting into bad situations. Women he dated who used it for his money, and he didn't really have the money to give, but big hearted man that he is, I'm getting screwed over a lot. That's how I ended up with my grandparents. I couldn't take it from my grandfather anymore. The day I turned 18, I ran away from home. I didn't come home, and it was rough. I was still in high school. My father showed up a couple days later, and I've never seen him cry. And he was trying so hard not to cry, and he knew there was nothing he could do other than cry and say, "Why did you do it? Why did you run away?" But when I told him, he's like, "I know, I know, I know. He's my father, I know." And just, it was rough. Not much more I can say about it. And I I continued to try, and I lived from my own since the day I turned 18. And my father wanted to help, but there wasn't much he could do at that point because he was still in a bad living situation himself. There was no place he could take me. I ended up being okay. I found ways. There was a small, in my area, so there was only stuff for women, nothing for men at this time. And they ended up putting me with a foster parent teacher who volunteered to let me stay there to finish out that school year. And everyone checked off the boxes since they're licensed foster parents and whatnot, and I stayed there with them till the end of that year. And it was a struggle. It was different. And after that, the end of that school year, there was only like 3 months left. They ended up moving away, so I ended up finding my own place, which you will hear about in the next chapter, an abandoned home that I was able to legally occupy. So that's the short summary of my childhood. And there's not much I can remember. There are parts I'm leaving out. There was a house fire at one point. There were some other things that I will never share publicly because they're awful. But yeah, next chapter. So I wanted to talk to you about this point in my life. In this point in my life, I had ran away from home already, as you've heard in the previous segment. And I needed work. I needed to be able to pay my bills. And the job I had before this was a temporary gig that I lucked into, helping children who were volunteering their time, well, their parents volunteered their time, to help repair people's homes during their summer vacation. My job was to help make sure they were fed and things were taken care of for them in between them doing their volunteer work, because it was kind of like a summer camp program. Well, that ended up at the end of the summer, which was fine. I actually ended up having an exit interview since it was an internship program type thing. And the complaint that I got was I made people feel like they weren't working hard enough. I don't know what you take with that. I think that's actually a good thing, somewhat. Means I'm a hard worker. But it did make some other people feel uncomfortable. I do somewhat apologize about that. With that said, though, I then was looking for a job. I then found myself at a job at a supermarket that had a cafe. Something like this. They served some coffee. Wasn't anything as fancy as like this or like a Starbucks or anything. It wasn't that type. We did have some coffee. We had a drink fountain. There's some hot dogs, popcorn, small pizzas and pita breads, fresh salads, parfaits, and sandwiches, stuff of that nature. I ended up doing this job for a good year and a half of my life, up till about 19 and a half. I was doing this job while I was finishing up high school. I basically went to school for only the class that I needed to graduate, and that way I could come right after work. I mean, right after school, straight into work. That way I could get the hours I needed in order to pay my bills, because at this point I was living on my own in what was called in my state, an abandoned home. Basically, what that means is the home's owner abandoned the property either because they died or something happened to them and they left the property abandoned. And the state doesn't allow the landowner to resell the home until a few years have passed. So instead, they just lease out the land and you become the inheritant of that facility. Ended up living in a home that was somewhat run down, but I did enough repairs to keep it together long enough for me to live there. So I did that for a good several years. I lived there for about 2 years, doing this job, coming home, cooking, taking care of the small place, and I was okay. I was somewhat happy, and I was building a life for myself. And well, I got lonely, and that makes sense because at this point I was on my own. I had a couple friends here and there, but didn't have somebody. I found somebody, and they lived far away. And I don't want to get into that too much, other than I started planning and saving up to move down to meet them. And, well, that part of my life is a whole nother story, but to go into that, I basically transferred my existing job, essentially doing what I did here, to another one of them. It was a nationwide chain. And long story short on that, I ended up becoming homeless because when we got there, it turned out, well, because I went with another individual, and we were both homeless because the individual we were supposed to be moving in with, things didn't pan out. So I still had a job, thankfully, but during the day, we would. Hmm. Let me bring you closer. We would go in, much like it is here, find a cafe or McDonald's and just go in, find a place to sit, buy a drink or two, just sit there and try and nurse the drink until they wouldn't be upset with us. McDonald's is usually the easiest and cheapest place to stay because it was only $1 for, the dollar menu stuff actually allowed us to eat. I became close with that individual and we started dating for a little bit as well. I guess it's one of those things that happens, dating out of circumstance. Wasn't bad. They were a nice individual. And we did this, and then we slept at a shelter that was more of a outside prison yard style shelter. You slept outside underneath the stars, but you were protected because you're inside of a gated area that they walked you through metal detectors and stuff as you came in. And that was where I lived for at least almost a year of my life, homeless on the street like that. Went to work, dealt with that, tried to hide it well. Thankfully, the place where we stayed, they did have showers and stuff, and they had laundry. So while you slept outside, they had like a little laundromat, a giant like prison shower thing. There was no walls or anything or curtains. It was just a room full of shower heads and I'd go and I'd shower and do my laundry, get my uniform and stuff as tidy as I could, and would do that, and I'd get to work. And I saved up enough for me to move again, because they had renewed some connections with the people they moved out with of a few states where we were at currently. So I then moved. We moved somewhere else, back to their friend's place. And it was okay for a while, but there was a lot of bickering, and it was a house filled with a lot of drama and whatnot. And as things started to stabilize for them, as they got another job and I had another job, and we started to drift apart because that relationship formed out of necessity for companionship, which does happen, and there's nothing wrong with relationships forming like that. But we moved past it. We grew apart. It didn't end the most amicably as it could, but we did end in a way that we both separated our different ways. I left and I moved across the country to another place. At the time, I was doing my freelance IT work, and one of my customers' daughters, former customer daughters, had a home space that they were trying to rent out. I moved there for a little while, and then they started moving on with their life. Nothing bad. That was a very peaceful transition out of there. Moved in with another friend who helped me from the past, so I moved across the country again. And shortly after that, I had a different job. Didn't work out because the job was crappy. I continued to do my freelance during all of this. This is how I was making a lot of my income, as I did a lot of freelance with some part-time work on the side in order to supplement my income enough to pay my bills. I then moved on, and I moved to getting my stuff back together, and I made some more mistakes again as my life was starting to get back together. After the third time moving, I fucked up again, and life is filled with fuck ups. I found a relationship that I wanted to try out, and it didn't end well. The person had promised me I'd be helping them pay for the place they moved into. Everything was sorted out. When I started moving across the country by bus, that's all I could afford back then, the day I arrived, they gave up on the place that they were living. Then I ended up in their parents' basement. It was most disturbing, and I only stayed there about 3 days. Luckily, my family that had, and for most intensive words, disowned me, without saying specifically disown me, the ones I ran away from, called me and apologized and said they needed my help, that my grandmother was sick and they needed someone to help take care of her. I needed an out. It was kind of a very lucky moment for me. So I took it and I moved back home. And I stayed with them for a while until my grandmother got better. And that was the start of the next chapter of my life. And we'll on to that next. So, I know there was a lot there. And I feel like there's just a little bit more I need to cover. With all those times I moved around and all those places I moved a total of like 4 times since I ran away from home. I did the internship, I worked at the cafe, I transferred the cafe to move across the country. I lost that cafe job because I moved away with the other person I was living with on the street so we could get stuff taken care of. And one part I left out, but I feel like I should disclose, but I can't say the word in the video. I was this, and it was not fun, and sadly that person traveled back with us. However, they were shortly found out after they tried to do it to a couple other people at the place we moved, and were promptly kicked out. It was not a good time, and I don't like dwelling on it. But I feel like I do want to at least disclose that that occurred to me, because you can still be successful and you can still hate what that does to you. And also that it doesn't just happen to, one gender or the other. It can happen to anyone. And that's all I want to say to that one. I don't want to dwell on that anymore. I've moved past that part. And I'm a better and stronger person because of it. I ended up traveling with one of the roommates over the road for a while, an over the road truck driver, to help them out because they had hurt their arm pretty badly and they needed some help. And so I helped them out a little bit. This person was not very nice to me and is one of the reasons why I have a lot of self-image issues now. They constantly berated me for how I looked. They make fun of how my weight. They made fun of my facial figure. They made fun of other parts of me as well. And it was quite constant. And I think it's one of the reasons why I still have image issues today, even though I have people in my life who tell me, I love the way you look. It, it's something that still bothers me to this day. But I'm working through it, and I have good supporting people. Oh, hello again. Now we get to where we start tracking through where we're getting closer to today. Towards the end, when I came back home, I started working at a it wasn't like a superstore, but they sell clothing and appliances. And I started working there once I came back and my grandmother was in a better space. I decided to start working and it was good. Like, I was actually making some money. I was really happy with how things were starting to go for me. And my whole personal life was starting to pick up. I was starting to have my own money again. I had a somewhat stable roof because I was living with family for the moment. And things were starting to work out okay. And that was so good. I started having the time to start focusing on me again. I didn't have the worry of all the other stuff in my life. I didn't have to worry about where my next meal was coming from anymore. I wasn't on the street anymore. Um, Before, yeah, I had the freelance job and working part time, but I was always living very close to the edge. I never really had much money. A lot of people have you believe that when you run your own business or you freelance, that you can make lots of money. I can tell you right now, sometimes you win some good contracts, sometimes you don't make much, which is why I was doing both the freelance and bagging groceries and working in a deli and other things of those natures on the side. I had to supplement my income just so I could barely afford to eat, as well as pay my business expenses. Very difficult. But that said, things started to look up for me at this point. I finally started to have things, I was able to save my money. My grandparents let me kind of stay there for a while I saved up to get my own place. So I started saving up. I started getting myself back together and I started talking to people again. I met two people and I made some mistakes with that. There was two people that were kind of on my radar that I was considering pursuing a relationship with. One was only 4 hours away from me. I could see more easily. The other lived on the other side of the country. Well, me already traveling the whole country before was like, that was just too hard. So I tried pursuing the local person. Ended up getting a small place together, but they ended up, every job that I helped them get, they ended up getting fired and they'd lie to me. They lied to me so much, and they purposely would get fired just so they didn't have to work, and it was so annoying. I couldn't stand it. And so I ended that relationship, and thankfully the other person started chatting with me again. And there's someone who I've been with now for 6 years. They're my current nesting partner, meaning that we live together. We don't get to spend too much time, even though we live together, because he is constantly working nights, and I constantly work the morning to day. So we pass each other, hug, kiss, or whatever on the way in and out of the door. We have the weekends, but we both kind of have our own things that we do and our own friends. The type of poly relationship that I'm in is we each have our own things, but we're there for each other when we really need each other. And that works for me and them. So I worked through that. But the thing was that store, well, I ended up applying for another job. And before I got ahead of myself. Before I ended getting with the person I'm with right now, I was still with the one who was toxic. We, he encouraged me to apply for a job that would pay more money, so I did. I ended up lucking out getting the job. Company I still work for today. I've been promoted several times since I've joined that company because they like my work ethic, they like what I can bring to the table for them, and I do good work, and I make customers happy, and they enjoy that about me. And because of that, but because I was supporting someone who didn't have a job at the time, I spent so many extra long hours and nights, just so much overtime, which I'm sure the company liked. But I was doing it at that time because I was still hourly back then on a help desk. That it ended up costing me so much grief because they didn't work. The boyfriend I had at that time didn't work. Kept losing his jobs on purpose. I pulled strings to get them jobs. And they wouldn't fire them, and they would try to get fired so they could get unemployment or benefits of some sort, which that's the point. I would ask for simple things. Could you clean up and make dinner? You don't even have to make it as I'm coming home. Just put it in the microwave. Didn't even do that. It was so frustrating. So when that relationship ended, I moved out on my own. I stayed on my own. Started dating the other person. Flew them down to visit me because I was starting to make a lot more money at this point in my life. It's another do-over. It's another start over. I had started dating another local person, but they had their own primary nesting partner that they lived with. Still with them today. However, we work together and whatnot. They're very sweet, but they're more of a parental style relationship, maybe I would say, in terms that I mainly go to them for advice and we chat with each other and give each other comfort. There is no other type of dynamic there. We tried some other things, those didn't work out for us. Yeah. But I also started dating the other person, the one from my past, the one that I'm with now. Flew them out. They've been making a little bit more money now. Bought them a round trip ticket to spend a week with me because they've been looking for work, and I knew my area was a smaller area with tons of opportunity for entry level jobs. They said they enjoyed my company. They saw that I was who I said I was, and they said it'd be a few months before they reconsidered joining me. But they ended up joining me like 2 weeks later. They drove all the way across the country, moved in with me, and we lived together for a few years. And it worked out pretty well, I think. We very happy, and at year 2 I had moved in somebody else to help rescue them from a bad situation, and they ended up moving out a little bit later on. However, at that point my partner couldn't really stand them, and they had already started dating somebody else. We're still together. They still made their attention to come visit me, and I made my attention to come visit them at times. They moved 3 hours away with their other partner. They couldn't stand the person I had moved in with me. They had bumped heads a bit, different mindsets. But I helped that person get out on their own with their own boyfriend at a certain point, and they are now together and live on their own, and they're happy, and he's in a much healthier relationship instead of an abusive one I helped him get out of. And now I'm in another place with my partner who recently moved back in with me, and over this past year, less than a year ago, he moved back with me, still with his other partner as well. But jobs in his area are rough and tough to come by because his other partner lives in a city where I live in a small town. And in towns, usually there's a little bit more job opportunity because there's less people to jobs sometimes in an area like mine with a bunch of colleges. College workers are not always the best employees, so they need locals who are willing to actually stay and do the job. And the college workers who are good are only here for a very limited time while they're going to school. And that's kind of where I'm at now. Things have gotten and changed so much for me that I have finally entered into, there's this thing called the Maslow's hierarchy. Talks about years of basic necessities to self-actualization. I'm now finally thinking I'm coming to self-actualization. I've had to fight most of my life, as you've heard. Didn't have a good childhood. Ran away the day I turned 18. Made mistakes, several of them, and ended up where I am now. I think I did pretty okay for myself at this point. A lot of experience under my belt, and I'm only 29. This next chapter, this final chapter, this is about where I am now and discovering who I am. So, next chapter. Okay. So I think I might have lied with the last chapter. This is the truthfully final chapter in terms of there's nothing more to say at this point because it's where I'm at now. I'm now at a point in my life where I'm figuring myself out. Most of my life I was trying to figure myself out and I was constantly struggling to survive and pay bills, stay on top of things, and not worry about becoming homeless again. I'm finally at that point in my life where I don't have that concern as much anymore. And I have 2 lovely partners, boyfriend who all care about me. I don't have to have those worries and concerns anymore. And now I've been exploring me. Something that I've been putting off for a long time. I helped that one person because in my past, and I had to help others, because the few people who were able to help me in my past all told me, you're never to pay me back, you were to pay it forward and help the next person. One of the reasons why I kind of want to put this video together, because I hope this is another way of helping other people know that life can be horrible, but we can do things to make it better and not to give up. I made it, and I know I'm lucky, but part of it is I didn't stop fighting. So if you're struggling, don't stop fighting. I know it's hard. I slept on the streets. Nowhere to go. I've been assaulted. I've had assaulted in multiple ways. But I'm still here. And I'd like to think I'm successful now. Even though I still struggle with depression, a little bit of anxiety, I'm still here. Still made it. Thing I have to say is, I want you to know I, now being able to focus on myself, struggled for a while now, be comfortable with thinking about myself. When I think back on those few moments when I was able to be happy for a moment, I didn't ever feel comfortable who I am. I still don't know either fully. But as I started having and meeting people here in VR this past year, it's been a year now I've been in VR. This allowed me to meet other people who have also struggled with identity issues, and this is the self-actualization part, the part that I struggled to allow myself. Because it's like, oh, you had to fight for all this other stuff your whole life. It's stupid to think about this. You don't have the right to think about it. It's not okay to think about it. Well, I have. I'm non-binary. What I choose to identify as now. Uh, I'm embarrassed a little bit, which feels weird to me. I didn't feel that embarrassed originally about being gay. I think it's just because the fight is different for me now. I don't. I mean, I still deal with a little bit of harassment and a little bit of judgment, but when I was younger, it was more like something that I could get behind, and I feel weird about it, but I know it's what feels right to me. I've I've always thought and enjoyed my family, actually my father, looking back and self-reflecting these days. Then I always acted very feminine times, and it bothered him, and he tried to get it out of me and try to work that stuff out. And well, sorry, didn't help. And I don't necessarily feel fully feminine. I don't feel fully masculine either. I don't feel like either of those really apply to me. I feel like I'm just this in between, that I'm just me. I love feminine. I act very feminine in a lot of things. And I act a little bit masculine in some other ways. And that has caused me to be who I am now. And well, I mean, who I've always been. But I didn't know words to describe what I was. And I felt embarrassed to use them. And sometimes I still feel a little shy about using them. But I'm meeting so many people who are making me feel more comfortable with being who I am. And I know it's so silly, and I think that's the reason why I struggle right now, is because I I have struggled most of my life, and I've made it somewhat now. And because I'm successful-ish now, I feel like I've lost the right to complain a bit. It's weird, and it's odd. I'm successful, I'm not rich. I still have lots of debt. Stuff that I've racked up over the years and stuff getting me on my feet. But I make a very fair salary. Not triple digit or anything. I wish. But I've got decent job security. I'm allowed to be who I am. I have good people in my life now. And it's just, I think that's why I feel like I just don't have the right to complain. I feel like They'll be like, but you've made it to a place you don't have the right to feel the things that you do anymore. And I know that's not true. But it doesn't change that that's how I feel. And that is where I am now. I've been struggling this past year, trying to figure out myself and what I want to do with myself. I love what I do, but I feel like I'm struggling to figure out who I am and wanting to not necessarily fully reinvent myself, but discover who I really am and the stuff that I haven't known about me. Because I fought all my life. I didn't really get to figure out who I am. I have a chance now. And that's what I'm going to do. I still love tech. I still like guys. But I also learned recently that I like people more than the gender of the person. And I also have more recently learned that, well, this is something I've always known, but sex isn't a thing that's a big deal to me. I'm more of someone who cares about the romantic aspects, about how a person feels, and caring about them and stuff of that nature. So, I don't know if I'm going to make another video soon, but I am going to start exploring myself more. And I'll probably make videos about that as well as I discover who I am in these next chapters in my life. So, I understand if you just want to be here for my tech content, that'll still be here. If not, I understand some of the stuff I said today is stuff that not many people agree with, and that's fine. You don't have to. It's a free world to believe whatever you want to. You can unfollow me, and you can choose not to watch my content. But at the same time, this is a new direction for me. And I know I'm a nobody right now. And I don't know if I'll ever be a somebody. But this is for me. And for those who need to know that there are other people out there who've had a rough life. They've had things happen to them and then they've fought. You're not alone. And that fighting does matter. And you just keep trying. Eventually, things will get better. At least they did for me, and I hope they do for you. I can't promise anything. But all I can say is I tried, and I fought. And I met some good people along the way. And I just hope, if anything I said today, just know that even when you are successful, or at least what you might consider successful, like how I consider myself successful now, you can still be depressed. I'm still depressed. And still have anxiety. And you can still be confused about who you are. That life is a never-ending journey. And it's okay. You just have to keep going. So thank you. And I just want to take a last minute to record and say thank you for watching this long video. I hope that I've strung this edit together well. It's my first time editing anything this long. And I do want to say a couple things. Number one, to the platform I recorded on. The platform I'm on is called Neos. There is no endorsement. There is no sponsorship. There is no nothing of that nature. I am just using their platform. It is built to build and create and do things. That is all I'm doing, is using it to create some content. I also want to thank the team who built the world that I'm using, which is the Vibes team. The world is called Rocky Retreat. It was built for the Metaverse Makers Contest 2021. If you have a Neos account, it's free. If you don't, you should really check it out. It's a beautiful world. It is offered amazing backdrops for my video. And finally, just to you for watching. This was a long video, and if you're watching this, you stayed to the end. So I thank you.